Hi, my name's Lindsay. I've been a Christian for nearly 50 years and it's just radically changed my life. I had two really amazing experiences, one before I became a Christian and the other one when I gave my life to Jesus and he called me to the ministry. But the first one, I was fairly lost and I was living in a big city in Brisbane. And I can remember going out with a man after work having drinks and he spiked my drink and had, in an arcade, and had attacked me. And I remember getting away from him. I was 18 years old and he was a married man and I managed to get away from him. He'd ripped all my clothes. I was locked in this vacant shop in an arcade. And I remember he stormed out after he'd attacked me. And when I went to leave, it was 3 a.m. in the morning, the door was jammed and I couldn't get out. And I went upstairs to the toilet area and I thought, what am I going to do? So it was an arcade and I actually had climbed over an arcade which had timber rails crisscrossed like this, and I dropped myself down into a garden restaurant. When I looked up, it had wrought iron to the ceiling. And I had checked all around. It had an outdoor cafe with plants. I went up to the concertina doors. They were all locked. I couldn't get in. There was no one there. And I was stuck. And I remember standing at the gate going, what am I going to do? And I didn't know what to do. I'm standing there. This man just suddenly appeared and said to me, you shouldn't be in here. And he opened the gate and let me out. Now I was quite hysterical. I took off running down the street, holding all my clothes together, and I ended up in a restaurant where they called the police because I was clearly not in my right mind. And they called the police and I ended up going home. The fellow turned up and they asked me if I wanted to press charges. I said no. And I caught my motorbike, I jumped on it and went home, and he went home to his family. That experience really affected me, and I left my job the next day, resigned, and went home to my parents. And that caused me to go to church because I was really rattled and I needed something more in my life. That was part of my experience in coming to the Lord. And it was in church that I found solace and comfort. And 10 years later, I realised that an angel had opened the gate and let me out. The other experience that I had, which was quite, again, an experience I never asked for. I was 1 year old in the Lord. My husband and I were living on a farm out in Western Queensland. He felt called to the ministry and said, we're going to join a particular ministry in Brisbane in the 70s. And I said, okay. And I asked the Lord, am I called? Because I didn't know what being called to the ministry was really all about. And I asked the Lord, am I called to the ministry too, or is it just my husband? One night we were going to bed. We'd been married a year. I was 20 years old. And the next minute, as I was going to sleep, I suddenly found myself standing in front of Jesus. And the glory of the Lord was just extraordinary. I was standing there looking at him, and I thought, my jaw was literally down on my chest. I was standing there like speechless, like Paul describes in the Bible. And I looked at him and I went, the glory is just amazing. And as I looked at him, he had eyes like fire, his hair was white like wool, and the glory, the whiteness and the lightness and the brightness just shone. I couldn't say anything. The next minute, Jesus started talking to me. But I couldn't understand because it sounded like rivers of living water coming out of his mouth. And I don't know how long I stood there looking at Jesus, just transfixed on him because he was so bright. But I do remember the glory started to fade, and I reached out for his glory. And of course that was ridiculous. But as I reached out and the glory faded, and all of a sudden I became aware of the four walls of my bedroom. And I remember slipping back into my body. Now, I don't remember leaving my body, but I sure remember coming back. And I just went, and I was back. And I was in my body. And I said to Peter, I said, honey, I think I've just had a vision. And he was asleep. And he just goes, we'll talk about it tomorrow. And I promptly went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up and I said, I think I had a vision. And he said, well, I don't know. We'd only been saved a year. I said to him, what do you think it means? And Peter said, well, why don't you ask the Lord? So I got up at what I thought was just a magical hour, which was midnight, in the middle of the night, and I took my Bible into the living room and I said, Lord, what did you say to me? Because I couldn't understand. He talked to me, but it was rivers of water. And I opened my Bible at the end of the book of John, where Jesus says to Peter, Peter, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know I love you. And he asked him again, he said, do you love me? And he said, yes, I love you. And he asked him a third time and he was grieved and he said, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. And as soon as he said that, I knew I was called to the ministry. And I remember coming down to Brisbane, asking the preacher that we were going to serve about this vision. He said, oh, that's a vision. He said, that'll be as real to you in 20 years as it is now. He said, that's Revelation 1:14. And I opened my Bible and I went, sure enough, that was the picture of Jesus that I'd seen. And I knew I was called to the ministry. And we've served the Lord all these years, absolutely loving God and loving the ministry. And I invite you to invite the Lord into your heart, because he will do more for you than you could imagine. He will transform your life as he did mine.